Okay, we'll do our right introductions. I'm Ruchika Sikri. I'm a partner at Wisdom Ventures Fund, and prior to that, I was at Google running their mindfulness and well-being programs to create the sustainable work culture. I'll let my partners really introduce themselves, and then we'll go into a dialogue about how to cultivate a nurturing and sustainable work environment. Kati, would you like to share a bit about yourself?
Thanks, Ruchika. Hi, everyone. I'm Kati. I'm the CEO of Applied. It's a hiring technology company looking at what it really means to hire talent in 2050, as opposed to what we've been doing for the last 1,000-odd years.
I'm not Victor from Preply. I'm Ali Fakeki, founder and CEO of Juno. Juno's mission is to inspire healthier workplaces by giving people better access to what it is that they value at work.
Yeah. Well, welcome, Kati and Ali. This is kind of the whole spectrum. So if you are a leader in an organization and you are hiring talent, we have some really good tips for you from Kati. And then how do you sustain and retain your talent? Ali is going to share some really cool things that he's doing with his team. And just to start off this topic, thank you for making time. You know, we're just seeing the diversity of the topics discussed at this conference, all the way from Web3 to robotics to sustainable farming and many things. But you know, at the heart of it all is like when you create a company is the people who work for you or where you work or choose to work. So we're also seeing that talent retention is becoming so challenging because you know, the Great Resignation movement, I don't know how it affected Europe, but I am from San Francisco, and about 43 million people resigned their jobs in 2021, and there were several reasons for it. Toxicity in work environment, disrespect that, you know, they didn't deserve and want, or just simple burnout, you know, from additional COVID challenges. And you know, we're seeing the mental health issues really rise around the world. 1 in 6 people are suffering from a mental health issue. Anxiety, depression, all of this is on rise. So if you're working in an organization, the chances are your colleagues might be experiencing something like that. And if you're a founder or a leader in our organization, your direct reports and your employees are in that boat as well. So how do we kind of really transition our work culture and take more ownership and responsibility as employees and employers is what we're going to dive into. So Kati, let me start with you. How does nurturing a sustainable work environment start with hiring? That's what you do with Applied. Tell us a little bit about Applied and how are you approaching this?
Of course. Well, happy to. We at Applied believe that culture starts at the point of entry. So you have to look at how you're hiring at the very first instance to really understand whether your processes work, whether the people you're hiring will stick around in your organization, whether those who are coming in will actually not just survive but thrive in the job. And how do you do that? That is the premise of Applied. For centuries, we've been using a piece of paper that is a resume or a CV or a LinkedIn profile that tells you, this is your name, this is your gender, this is where you went to school, this is how many years you worked for Google as a coder, and therefore, check, you're a great coder, let's call you in. That is absolute, apologies, bullshit. It should not be used in 2022, definitely not suitable for 2050. All of that has been invalidated by not just academic science, but also the science we are doing at Applied for the last 5 years. So we've helped about 500,000 applications through Applied for over 300 customers across Europe, UK, US, and they're all looking at what it really means to hire talent and how do you hire talent? How do you start the conversation to move away from that piece of paper? How do you bring to the table the skills that they bring? And Applied is all about taking a skills-based approach to talent. I'll stop there.
Oh, wonderful.
We'll go into the details of the product, but that's not important just yet.
Yes, I'm so curious to know the details of like how do you actually do that. But before we go there, Ali, just to bring you into a conversation, tell us, you know, I read your tagline on LinkedIn. We are meeting for the first time here as well in our lives. And his LinkedIn tagline said, imagine if well-being didn't just mean belly breaths and lunges. we made a lot of Googlers do belly breaths and mindfulness and also lunges. So I kind of feel like my job was not well done. So tell us a little bit more about what does well-being really mean
Sure.
for us in this age?
The basis of our business is that it's undefinable, like it's not a thing that you can just point at. And I think that businesses in the past have tried very, very hard, and I think meant well generally, in providing mental health and well-being support for their teams. But I mean, all of us in this room probably have been offered things in the past and just gone, well, I don't want that. I don't care about that. I don't have time for that. And so what we try to preach is a reimagination of roles, right? So giving employees the choice and the flexibility to define what it is that they care about, rather than letting an employer tell them, hey, we have lunchtime meditation. As great as that might be, I think where we can want to go into in the future is, listen, you know better than anyone what you need. We're going to give you the springboard to find incredible experiences, incredible products, great things that could help you, but we're not going to get in the way. You don't have to ask us for permission, and we're going to really broaden that definition of well-being because it's not really definable.
Mm-hmm. How fascinating is that? We did exactly the opposite, but also it's like the timing was 10 years ago, we created a lot of offerings within Google or directly worked with the vendors to bring these options to our employees. And I benefited from it too, but I also had I don't want that dinner coupon anymore. And now it's still sitting in my wallet. So I'd love to learn more about what are the different type of offerings that Juno is creating. But Kathy, bringing it back to you, when we were having a side conversation, you were so passionate about inclusion and diversity when it comes to hiring. Tell us, why is that important, and how does that actually create a sustainable work environment that nurtures high performance and inclusivity down the line as well?
Definitely. This is the time to bring in my sob story from my hiring experiences, but I'll go back to 2018, 2019. I had shut my first startup. I was looking for jobs, trying to build and take the same stream of themes, so data for good, tech for good, looking to get a job fairly senior in startups. And it was a horrible experience for about 8 months. This is in London. I've got several degrees. I've had a decent educational background. I would have thought my CV or resume would have done the part. Clearly not. So I was ghosted by employers. I had to pay recruiters. I did everything that I could. I got people to write my CV for me. I got people to write my cover letter for me. I did everything possible under the sun as a candidate. But I think the penny dropped for me when one of the recruiters said, A, you don't sound the part. So nobody in the tech world is looking for people like you. And 2, you will never get a C-suite job. And those two conflated for me, and this was that's the end. Hiring is completely broken. The way we view talent and the way we apply a lens on talent is broken. We are still so attached to what this person looks like, what this person sounds like, what their gender is. Why should all that matter? Me being able to do this job, me running a company has nothing to do with my gender, has nothing to do with my age, has nothing to do with where I studied. And that's what should be able to express, people should be able to express that in the process. And that was my experience. That's why, from a very personal viewpoint, I'm very passionate about making sure Applied gives level access to people from all backgrounds. So it's about creating level economic opportunities for everybody, no matter where they come from, what they look like, where they've studied. And that's why we do what we do at Applied.
Yeah.
I think just on that point, it's not D&I so that you can say it's D&I and check a box. It makes, for those companies, it makes a lot of economic sense. Mm-hmm. It opens the talent pool. It means you're bringing in more diverse people, not just by background, but by the way that they think or their previous roles. And so every organization would benefit from that. So I think that's I'm going to start using Applied, actually, for our hiring, because it's not always been easy.
Well, but for me, the business case of diversity dilutes the proposition, right? We should be much past the business case. We should be looking at it in terms of a more inclusive approach, which is what is the morality behind it. And that's why it's more important to me, because we can look at all of the research that exists that says diversity does add to the bottom line.
Yeah.
But
And indeed it does, So, when a company is creating anything, like you're creating a hiring talent pool for your customers and you're giving well-being options, what I've learned is like everybody approaches these topics differently. And if we don't have that representation of that in our own companies, guess what? We're going to be very biased towards, unknowingly, unconsciously biased towards what we know. And we're not going to have a very comprehensive view towards things, how we build our products, how do we serve our customers. In fact, just landing here, talking to a few founders who are creating like therapy apps, because that's what Wisdom Ventures is doing. We're investing in mental health and well-being. The way they're approaching to bring therapy to the clients in Spain and Italy is just so different than how, the founders I work with in United States of America are approaching it. So we know that it matters to know the depth of the culture if you really want to expand globally. Just taking it back to you, Ali, tell us what was your inspiration to create Juno and
Sure.
how is it going?
Well, before I dive into that, I
Yeah.
think one of the things we just touched on is companies removing a hubristic kind of sense and role, which is like, we know better, we know how to hire, we know what people want best. It's very monolithic. Right, it's very hubristic. It's very like, senior or sort of senior leadership led, and that's where the issues lie. It's actually about deconstructing that and being a little bit more, not grassroots necessarily, but being able to have humility as a business and say, you know what, we don't know how to hire the best people maybe, and we want to know, and opening that up. Same thing with well-being. Yeah. My story is very simple, which is I worked in startups. I always thought we could do much better in terms of supporting ourselves and also our employees if we were employers. And then just personal experience working a very stressful, high-intensity role, like many other startup roles, having a personal life, actually having a life outside of work, which was also stressful, and realizing that none of the stuff that this company, preaches about is in any way helpful or going to make any difference. And how hard could it be to make an impact? Like, we go home and we use Netflix, right? We go home and we use amazing products and services, and yet we're expected to use crap at work, right? We're expected to use outdated insurance portals that are just like designed in '96. We're expected to just take whatever's on offer, and companies are just wasting so much money. Well, were until we came along, wasting so much money on stuff that just wasn't being used. So ultimately, I had the brainwave. The idea had me, not the other way around. And it was clear, like you should give people what we use as a marketplace. There are a lot of card companies out there. I mean, we have a card as well, but it's very supplementary. So in Spain, there's like a Kobe or in Swal in France. But we bet hard on the marketplace because I feel like people need inspiration. They want to know exactly what it is that they could get. Maybe they didn't think of something. Maybe they thought, I never considered getting a consultation with a nutritionist would improve my life. I maybe never would have thought of that, and that's kind of our angle there. So 3.5 years going strong, and my parents strongly discouraged me from leaving my job and starting this, but I'm glad that I did.
Yeah, and so many people are benefiting from it as well. I truly believe that when it comes to well-being, and I think everybody in this room can, when I say what can bring you well-being in this moment, the answer, if I asked all of you to stand up and share an answer, it might be different. There might be some overlaps, but it's really meeting people where they are in their lifetime. Like, I have 2 kids now, what I needed when they were younger, like with babysitting and support for them, is very different than what I need for my well-being. More massages now, just really recovering from the parenting still. But bringing it back to you, Kathy, can you help us pull a thread from maybe giving us an example of a client you worked with where they really paid attention to the principles that you are promoting through and advancing through Applied, and hired the talent that should be in that company. And it's a good match for them. So how did that end up helping them create the sustainable and nurturing work environment, from hiring to keeping people?
Definitely. I'll talk about the principles a little bit, and
Yes,
then I'll give you
please
the
do.
example, which happens to be from the VC industry, so you would sympathize with that.
Okay.
So the principle, simplistically, is twofold. One, we give you good data, the data that really matters for you to know whether this person will be right for your company, for your role, and whether they will thrive in the job. And two, we remove anything that is bad data. So in science, we call it noise. We remove everything that is noisy. So everything that is noisy, examples of that include your gender, your age, where you worked before, where you went to school. All of that is not predictive. It will tell you nothing about that person's capability to do that job in your company. You have to contextualize their skills within your team, and that's what we do. So those are the principles. Of course, I don't want to go into the technicalities of the product, but I will give you an example of how people have used it. So forgive me, but the VC industry is notorious for not being inclusive. And they hire a certain kind of people. I say it with all the love. They are known to hire a certain kind of people, right? They have to be from the top consulting companies or have gone to the best investment banks and have a certain finance profile. And we have certain VC customers who are really opposed to change because there is a big education burden that comes with Applied. We are informing and teaching people that there is a problem. The way we used to hire and have been hiring for the last 100, 200, 500 years is not suitable anymore in a more heterogeneous world. And it's definitely not the right way for looking at the future of work in a post-pandemic world where we don't even understand the complexities of work. And the VCs we have been trying to work with, it's fascinating because there is so much education that goes up front with them. And then the wheels start to work and you see the action being done in motion. And one of the examples is, it's in fact an Australian VC, I won't name them here, but they're growing really well, and they are using Applied for all their hires. And what they've done is seen that over the last 50 hires they've done, 95% have been women, of ethnic minorities, and they are from completely different backgrounds than they would have expected. So they're not a typical consulting finance background. And it's because we're able to give you the good data. It's because we're able to say, this is a level playing field. You don't need to care about gender, age, ethnicity. You only need to test for talent. You only need to test for skills. Once you start testing for that, you see that it is a level playing field. So it is completely organic. The premise at Applied is diversity is going to be organic outcome if you do the right process. If you do a fair process, if you do a robust predictive process, if you use the right good set of data, you remove the bad data, you will organically see that you get the right people in the job, they will stay, they will be representative, you will have a high-performing team. So that's an example that is really close to me because it tells us that it is possible and it is organic.
Yeah. So just to get this right, so when you share the candidates' profiles with the company, you strip out all the data.
We don't share profiles.
Amazing.
So you do not see a LinkedIn profile, you do not see a CV, you do not see a resume, because a lot of the information that sits there, you can't really glean anything.
And is that a manual process, or you have an engine that's
It's
actually
an engine.
helping?
It's a software engine that automates all of that for the customer.
That's fascinating, isn't it? Wow.
I think on that point, it's interesting that you used a VC as an example. Are there any VCs in the audience? Okay, one. So to those that are VCs, I think that humility is in very short supply in VC, I have to say. It is very much an industry based on we know better. Now, we're founders. I'm a founder. I'm not going to lie. I think I know better in a lot of ways as well. But companies that espouse humility and are able to say, you know what, we don't know how to pick companies that are going to bring back our fund 10x. Or we don't know which employees we're going to hire that are going to be the best employees for our team. But we don't really know best. And the same thing with benefits. It's the idea of having the humility to say, we're pretty good at a couple things, but on these, we probably should focus on data or remove ourselves and our biases and not have this hubristic approach of, no, I'm going to hire people that went to schools like mine because they tend to be the hardest, whatever the nonsense is that, or, in VC land, it's, they like to kind of roll the dice and say, that's a great company and that isn't. And again, it's about being open to thinking, okay, well, what if we are wrong? Mm-hmm. And why don't we just leave it up to, in our case, the employees to decide, not us, and then yours to leave it to the data to actually say, well, you may have thought that you knew better, but actually try this and see how that works for you. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, tips noted. We're a baby VC company, so thank you for infusing this in us already. And it's fascinating. I worked in people operations side of Google, and we had benefits and hiring and trainings and learning and development. So I've kind of seen the whole 9 yards of how a people operations organization can run, and you both are representing it so well, but in a very in a way that's like really suitable for our current climate and also really preparing us for the future. Now the workforce is like digital first and remote first, right? Like who wants to go to office? And half of the employees, I think, who were part of the Great Resignation, they left because the companies were forcing them to come back to the building where they didn't want to come anymore for several reasons, right? So in this case, just talking about the diversity of ideas and options the employees can have is so important. So I would love to just also talk to you both about, it's also hard being entrepreneurs and senior leaders in smaller companies. So maybe, Kathy, you start and tell us, what have been your biggest challenges, and how do you sustain your own well-being in the whole process? Because there might be some leaders and startup founders who might benefit from just your sharing.
Well, the truth is it's a constant struggle, isn't it? As a CEO and founder, it always is. It is lonely at the top, as they say, and that's true. You can't really share with your team members. You can't really share with the people below you. And so you constantly have to look for friends and people who are in the same job outside of your company, and hope you'll be able to understand and share sensibilities. So that's one. Find your network of people who will be your support system. It's, for me personally, that's the only way, because you really can't. You have to be a shield for your team. Mm-hmm. And you can't, even in a worst day, you have to put your smile on, and you have to be like, everything's going to be okay, even though it's not. So I think finding your network of people who can really support you in the really hard days is really important. Anything, Ali?
It's tough because I'm so unbelievably privileged that it's hard to even complain. I would have killed to do what I'm doing 5 years ago, or even younger. This is amazing, and that I get to be with you and we get to do this. But I struggle with boundaries. People try and take your time. They rely on you, so you need to be fairly boundaried, not just because you want to be open for your team, you want to be available for your team. You don't want your team thinking, oh, he's not having a great time, or I don't want to approach him at this moment, or maybe his door feels closed, he's not approachable. But that means you really have to be prepared to set boundaries everywhere else. Mm-hmm. I'm sure the three of us, and probably everyone in this room, gets non-solicited, let's go for a coffee emails, or let's catch up, or let me pull your ear emails. Mm-hmm. And I used to send those, and now I'm on the other side of them. I'm like, I can't do that. There's no way. So you have to be able to draw some boundaries around you, because if you don't, you're just going to end up being torn to shreds. But, by and large, I have no complaints whatsoever.
Yeah. And you have a great team, both of you, that continues to support you as well. Well, great. Is there anything that I didn't ask you in this beautiful conversation that you'd like to share with the audience today? And maybe we might actually have a minute to take a question from them as well.
Does anyone have questions? Okay, we have a question at the back.
Yeah?
So you're talking, I think, a lot about research and what people forward, but then you still have
Oh, it's someone.
the bias of the how do you
Yeah, I understand the question, and it's a very good question. So at Applied, we meet the client where they are. Some people are absolutely at the beginning of the journey where they say they're not biased at all. So there is a lot of education. And there are some people who think, oh, the bias is only in the interview stage and not in the selection process. And there is equally important education piece that goes there. But as a product, we do end-to-end hiring. So we help you remove bias and bad data and noise throughout the system. Arguably, there is much better data in the pre-selection phase because you can test for skills, you can test for mission alignment, you can test for a lot of different variable factors that should be relevant for the role. Once the person comes to the interview, of course, there will be some human connection that needs to be developed. There will be some bias at play there. What we are doing is surfacing that. We are giving you the data. So if there is bias, you would be able to tell in your interview process that, oh, you asked question 5 from these 3 people, and only the women dropped out from that round. So you can see that. So we are creating accountability in a way, and you can see that, and then democratize hiring throughout the hiring team, where they will know who did what, essentially, which doesn't always go down well with the hiring team. Mm-hmm. But it's very difficult to remove all bias from the interview process. We all know that. Yeah, and we don't claim to do that. It's minimizing and mitigating where as much as possible as we can, and giving you the data to be able to make really informed decisions.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Yeah.
There's one up here.
Yay.
Yes.
It works.
It's working.
Yes, it works. Okay, so my question was, how do you educate clients, basically, that wellness is important? Because I have struggled with that arena, and even startups tell me like, oh, but we're not stressed. And I'm like, well, but what do you define stress or burnout? And yeah, it's like this rush, and they don't see it like that. And also, for me, it's very important prevention, right? So
yeah.
They don't have to pass to, well, stress, we all feel stress, but burnout. So how do you go through that so companies or clients like say, okay, this matters?
Yeah, I mean, you have early adopters, right? The early adopters have that ingrained in them. I can name 2 companies that we work with. One of them is Oyster HR, the other one is Stewart, the global logistics company. They're just 2 examples of companies that are the opposite of what you say, which is that they are totally aligned and they totally are so in their DNA, it's so in their DNA that well-being, culture, happiness, supporting each other is core. So those early adopters start using, Juno, for example, at the beginning, and then other companies that maybe are a little bit behind the curve, they start looking and going, why are they getting the best candidates? Why are they keeping their staff? And so it tends to be a wave. Now, that being said, I think if you're in that organization and that's not a possibility, that's what we try and preach, is like removing even having to convince the senior team that well-being is important. We want to say, look, this is just like a service that you have to have in the same way that you used to have an office. And we never talk about ROI ever in any of our pitches and on our website, none of that. A lot do. It's like 78% well-being increase. We don't believe in any of that data. We think the data there is nonsense. But we try and say, well, you got to do this. It's just the right thing to do. It's what modern companies have to do. And if they want to evolve, that's what they have to embrace, And then just the third point of your question, I'm not really answering them, but I'm kind of like adding comments to it. The third point is being preventative rather than like reactive. I think a lot of even today, these mental health startups, they're great, but you don't want your employees to have to see a therapist, right? You don't. Not to say that therapy is always a completely reactive thing, but I think meeting people where they are super important, right? Like, okay, let's improve your life day by day, bit by bit, and then if you do need that, then it's there for you when you need it. I think we're out of time.
Yeah, we are out of time.
Well,
Great
thanks,
question.
everyone.
Thank you, both of
Thanks,
you,
everyone.
for being with us, and thanks for the